I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to have been given this opportunity this afternoon to raise an extremely important matter to my constituents, namely the rebuilding of Wickford Station. I appreciate that the Rail Minister sits in the House of Lords, so he cannot be present to respond to this debate, but I'm very grateful to his ministerial colleague, the local Transport Minister, for being present in lieu, especially on a Friday afternoon when no doubt he also had pressing demands from his constituency. So thank you. Perhaps before I get into the matter of the station itself, for context, I could explain to the Minister why this proposed redevelopment of the station is so important for the regeneration of Wickford, which is the second largest town in my constituency. In essence, Wickford and my constituents who live there have been through a tough time over the last few years since the COVID pandemic. We've seen a number of banks closing on the high street, in addition to several other retail outlets, and the footfall on the high street is not as high as the local traders would like. The police station was closed several years ago, although I understand that Basildon Borough Council, the local authority, have plans to redevelop the site as a community hub. In addition, we used to have two medium-sized supermarkets in the town, a relatively new one run by Aldi and a more long-standing one run by the Co-op. Unfortunately, the Co-op store closed several years ago, whilst Aldi demolished their old store in order to build a new and enlarged version. The net effect of this was that for over a year, the town had no supermarket of its own, other than a small Iceland in the high street. This meant that my constituents often had to travel some distance in order to conduct their weekly shop. On top of this, there have been quite a number of flats built in the town in the past few years, which have meant that we've lost quite a lot of car parking space, particularly as a large part of the town's main car park, located next to the old Co-op site, has been blocked off, thus making the town a more difficult place to visit for those who have to come by car as opposed to by rail. I'm pleased to report that Aldi rebuilt the store, which is at the bottom of a shallow slope leading directly down from Wickford Station itself, and I had the honour of reopening the store back in November 2023. In addition, the developers who own the old Co-op site, which is a 5-minute walk from Wickford Station, have now submitted planning permission to Basildon Borough Council to demolish it and rebuild a brand new store with a number of low-rise flats on top, and we're very hopeful they will soon succeed in agreeing a lease with a major supermarket chain, the name of which I've been asked not to mention because the negotiations have not yet concluded. But suffice to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's an open secret across the entire town who it is. I very much hope that these negotiations will come rapidly to a close, and then the company concerned can make a formal announcement. Lastly, there have been a considerable number of roadworks in Wickford over the last few years, some of which have unfortunately badly overrun, including some not far from Wickford Station itself. By far the worst transgressor in this regard are Cadent, who principally maintain gas infrastructure, who have further works planned in Wickford and also in other parts of my constituency, including Hockley, where the residents are so fed up with endless roadworks, some have nicknamed the village Blockley instead. In my experience, Cadent often start late and clock off early, which means that their works take far longer than otherwise would be necessary. They are one of the least productive companies I've ever seen. As I'm here in front of a Transport Minister, I cannot tell him how appallingly Cadent have behaved with regard to my constituents, and I hope that's something we can follow up separately, perhaps with his colleague, the Roads Minister, the member for Nottingham South. I mention all of this to try and convey to the Minister that the town has gone through something of a tough time in recent years, and as the local MP, I'm very keen to promote its regeneration. That, I hope, segues nicely to the situation at Wickford Station itself. The issue arises because several years ago, Abellio Greater Anglia, as they were then known, demolished half of Wickford Station in order to extend the platforms for a new fleet of 720 class trains. The new trains were designed to replace relatively old Class 321 rolling stock, which unfortunately suffered from quite a lot of reliability issues. I can see the Minister is nodding. I'm pleased to tell the House that since the new class trains have been introduced, reliability has markedly improved. So in that respect, my constituents have been getting a better service. However, the long-promised rebuild of the station has yet to occur, and at present, Wickford station basically consists of several platforms, an old footbridge without a lift, and a number of very unattractive porter cabins, which I hope the Minister will accept is hardly a station fit for the 21st century. The whole issue of rebuilding the station has turned into something of a Norse saga, and I would not try the Minister's patience this afternoon by attempting to recount every single twist and turn of the tale, but suffice to say, the rebuild is long overdue. I've been consistently lobbying the Department for Transport for several years to try and achieve the reconstruction of the station. As part of this effort, I made representations to the then Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman MP, and I'm pleased to say that I managed to persuade him to ensure that funding was provided by the Department to allow Greater Anglia to undertake the work. I then told my constituents, in all good faith, that we finally had the money, and therefore I was confident that works would begin. In addition, Greater Anglia is part owned by Mitsui, a very large Japanese corporation headquartered in Tokyo, which has a number of global investments in different sectors, including transport. In order to try and progress the project, back in March 2024, prior to the general election, I was serving on the House of Commons Defence Committee when we undertook a trip to Tokyo in order to prepare a report into the new Global Combat Air Programme, or GCAP, which is aimed to be the RAF's new Spitfire for the 21st century. As we were in Tokyo anyway, I took the opportunity to try and organise a meeting with Mr. Hayato Iyama, who is the Deputy General Manager of Mitsui's Mobility and Industrial Business Division, and as such, oversees their transport-related investments in the UK. The Embassy absolutely went the extra mile, or perhaps I should say track, and managed to set up this meeting, and I was delighted to spend over an hour with Mr. Iyama in order to familiarise him with the background and context of the issue. I think it's fair to say that as an investor in Greater Anglia, he was very supportive and undertook to see what he could do to help. I wish to place my thanks to both him and Mitsui on the record this afternoon. I should also like to thank the British Ambassador, Mrs. Julia Longbottom, and her staff for helping to facilitate our discussion. I joked with her subsequently that when the new station eventually opens, I would like to see a plaque saying, "This station was rebuilt with the assistance of the British Embassy in Tokyo." I hope Greater Anglia are listening to this debate, Minister. I have a funny feeling that they are. And that after all of this, that's the least that they could do. Back in Britain, following the general election, Greater Anglia initiated a competition for a contractor to rebuild the station. Unfortunately, because the programme itself had been subject to multiple delays, by the time the bids came back, they had slightly exceeded the originally allocated budget. Nevertheless, I understand that Greater Anglia have negotiated with the department who have managed to provide some extra resource such that the project can now go ahead, for which I would like to say thank you today. On the 28th of February 2025, Greater Anglia formally announced that the contract to rebuild the station had been signed with Walker Construction and that the rebuild of the station would finally go ahead. Indeed, Martin Beeble, the Managing Director of Greater Anglia, said at the time, and I quote from their press release, "We are glad to confirm that the contract for the station upgrade at Wickford is now signed. We look forward to confirming details of the timings and the delivery of the scheme later in the spring, then to the implementation of the project to provide customers with better facilities at the station." On that point, as someone who campaigned very hard during the previous Parliament against what I described at the time as misguided proposals to remove the ticket offices at a majority of stations around the country, I'm very pleased to see that not only were these proposals abandoned, but that the new design at Wickford Station will include a ticket office. Indeed, the new design is, as I understand it, likely to be used as a model for for the construction or reconstruction of other small to medium-sized stations across the country. As part of the design, there's an iconic clock tower, or so it says in the marketing material, on which people seem to have firm views, either one way or another. For the record, I quite like the look of it, but I appreciate that some of my constituents have different architectural tastes, shall we say. Nevertheless, I think the overall design is a good one, and the sooner they start building it, the better. Having been in a lot of discussions with Greater Anglia over this project for several years now, I hope the Minister will forgive me if I also take this opportunity, at their request, to remind them of the Department's proposals to upgrade Ely Junction, which they believe is an urgent and critical priority, which has widespread business and industry support across East Anglia. I hope the Minister will forgive my cheek in taking this occasion to remind him of that priority. Turning to the timings of the station rebuild project, given the history of all this, I can understand why Greater Anglia are cautious about providing timings for the programme, because were they then to be exceeded, perhaps because of bad weather during the construction phase, for instance, there would then be a further wave of criticism from my constituents. Nevertheless, I do think that it's reasonable to give my constituents at least some indication in terms of how long all of this might now actually take. Having spoken very recently to Greater Anglia, they are confident enough for me to say that they expect work to begin on the site this summer, and they are also confident that the work will be completed by the end of 2026 at the latest, although they are hopeful that they might be able to shave some time off that, particularly if the good Lord is kind with the weather, which I very much hope that he may yet be. I appreciate that there will be some inevitable disruption at the station itself while the works are being undertaken, but nevertheless, Greater Anglia assure me that they will do everything they can to run a train service whilst the work is underway. There is one additional issue I'd like to raise with the Minister this afternoon regarding disabled access. A number of my constituents have contacted me to express their dismay that the proposed design does not include wheelchair accessible facilities, such that people would still need to negotiate the old footbridge in order to reach the London-bound platforms. I note in passing that when the new station was constructed at London Southend Airport several years ago, it did indeed include full disabled access as part of that design. I understand this would normally be facilitated by an Access for All grant, which Greater Anglia have previously applied for, but to date at least, they've unfortunately been unsuccessful. So perhaps the Minister would allow me to put in a plug this afternoon for any future resources which I hope might yet be looked on more favourably to solve this problem. However, while this would clearly be desirable, especially for my disabled constituents, given all the previous delays to the project, I think the absolute priority must be getting the rebuild underway, and then hopefully, if we can eventually achieve full disabled access, that would be very much the icing on the cake. So to summarise, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister for being here this afternoon to listen to my impassioned plea on behalf of my constituents after years of delay to finally get Wickford Station rebuilt. As I said earlier, this has been a North saga with a whole number of twists and turns, but now that Greater Anglia has finally signed a building contract with Walker Construction, I do hope that work can now get underway this summer and then hopefully be completed by the end of 2026 at the latest, and ideally sooner than that. As someone who campaigned very hard in the previous Parliament to maintain ticket offices at our stations across the country, I'm very pleased to note that the design of the new Wickford station will indeed contain a ticket office, as I believe it's a very important element of customer service, and I'm sure my constituents will welcome the fact the new station will have one as well. Whilst the current design for the new station, which will be used as a model for other new small and medium-sized stations around the country, does not include full disabled access, I do hope at some point it'll be possible to provide this at Wickford as well. In the meantime, I'm very pleased that the long-awaited rebuild of Wickford Station will now, finally, go ahead in order to serve my constituents and provide what they've long asked for, which is a station in Wickford which is fit for the 21st century. I thank the Minister for his patience, as I've outlined so much of the background to this story. and I now very much look forward to his reply.
Minister Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to start by congratulating the Right Honourable Member for Rayleigh and Wickford for securing this debate and providing the opportunity to discuss the rebuilding of Wickford Station. And I thank all Honourable and Right Honourable Members for their contributions, of course, throughout today, this Friday. I recognise the Right Honourable Member's concern and frustration at the length of time it has taken for the station rebuild to progress. But let me explain a little bit of the background, as I'm sure he will be familiar. The original station building needed to be demolished to facilitate and enable the introduction of Great Angula's brand new longer fleet of trains, as otherwise the bay platform, that is the dead-end platform at the station, could not be extended to accommodate the new trains. Alternative options of extending the platform in the opposite direction would have been far more expensive, as they would have required re-signalling, and there was not the space to implement that option. It's important to reiterate that without carrying out this bay platform extension, the Southminster branch would have been the only part of the Great Anglia network not to benefit from the £1.4 billion investment in new trains which are now operating across the entire Greater Anglia network. The changes at Wickford Station were therefore essential, and a scheme was developed to both extend the platform and provide new station facilities in place of the old building. With those approvals secured, the old station building was demolished and the station became reliant on temporary facilities. The delivery of the Wickford Station scheme was then delayed by COVID-19 and the wider funding challenges facing the rail industry in its aftermath. Understandably, in a cost-restrained environment where the industry's revenue was vastly reduced for a couple of years, the introduction of the new trains was a key priority, as it affected millions of passenger journeys and would underpin the recovery of passenger numbers from the pandemic. It's worth explaining a little more about the new train fleet programme. The new longer trains required a significant investment programme at stations and depots across the Greater Anglia network. There has been significant investment in depots such as Ilford and Norwich Crown Point. Several stations on the West Anglia route needed platforms to be extended, and funding needed to be secured for these vital works to take place, in addition to the platform extension needed at Wickford Station. That fleet transformation programme has allowed Greater Anglia to introduce the new Class 720 trains that have addressed key customer priorities, with additional seating capacity, air conditioning, plug and USB points, and improved accessibility features. Furthermore, they are more reliable and resilient, improving operational performance on the network and therefore improving the service provided to passengers. I'm pleased to note that Greater Anglia is one of our highest performing operators in Q2 of 24-25, during which 85.6% of trains were classed as on time, leaving within 1 minute of schedule. When you compare data from before the introduction of the Class 720s with more recent data, the improvement is clear. In 2019 to 2020, on-time performance was 69.9%, and 3.2% of services were cancelled. In 2023-24, on-time performance was 86.2%, and cancellations have halved to 1.6%. In fact, Greater Anglia has consistently been one of the best-performing UK train operators since April 2023, and the new trains have been a key factor in that positive track record. Returning to the station project itself, a combination of funding challenges facing the post-pandemic rail industry and the need to ensure the new trains were all in service as soon as possible contributed to delays in the scheme. However, despite these challenges, Greater Anglia continued to develop the design and concepts for the project. As a result of its work, Greater Anglia has planning approval for a new building and awarded the design and build contract to Walker Construction towards the end of last month. The contract has been signed. Detailed timescales for implementation are now being finalised and will be confirmed once agreed. The Wickford Station redevelopment project represents a landmark UK rail infrastructure. As the first of its kind, this project uses the new and innovative Network Rail Hub Station modular design concept, which integrates sustainability, adaptability and community engagement into a cohesive modern station blueprint. The hub design has been developed by Network Rail over several years, and this project is the first to use the modular design in practice by combining innovative design elements such as modular pods, photovoltaic canopies and energy-efficient systems, as well as highly cost-effective design and build methodology. The project establishes a new benchmark for railway stations nationwide. The new station will have features that improve the passenger experience, with a large canopy providing shelter for 70 seated and 345 standing passengers, a spacious waiting room, an accessible toilet and an integrated ticket office. Automatic ticket gates will also be a feature, enhancing security at the station, protecting industry revenue and managing passenger flows. The Department will continue to seek further opportunities to improve rail accessibility, including taking advantage of the opportunities created by our rail reform programme. This includes the establishment of a powerful new passenger watchdog, which will champion passenger interests, with a view to improving service performance and to ensure GBR and other operators meet passenger expectations. The Government is determined to clamp down on street works, referred to by the Right Honourable Gentleman, that cause unnecessary disruption in local areas. And that is why we've announced increases to fixed penalty notices and extended overrun charges of up to £10,000 per day, so that they also apply at the weekends. The Government also wants to see the rollout of lane rental schemes in England, which is a tool to help highway authorities reduce the impact of works taking place on the busiest streets at the busiest times by charging utilities up to £2,500 per day for works on these roads. And we've recently announced that at least half of the surpluses from lane rental should be spent on highway maintenance. Following the publication of the English Devolution White Paper, a consultation is underway about devolving powers to approve new rental schemes from the Secretary of State to mayors. On the issue of accessibility, the plans for Wickford station improvements also make provision to allow for future installation of lifts. Any future funding, of course, would be subject to the ongoing spending review. The Government is committed to improving accessibility of our railway and recognises the considerable social and economic benefits that this brings to communities. In conclusion, there is positive news on the Wickford station upgrade scheme. With the design and build contract now awarded, I am pleased that the station project can proceed and works will commence in 2025. Joel.
I'm very grateful as he's obviously coming to a conclusion. I'd like to thank him again for being here this afternoon and for the support that has been given to rebuild the station. As the constituency MP, I'm very grateful. Could you just give me comfort on one further point? Although the works will be extensive, it is indeed the intention, is it not, to try and maintain train services through Wickford as far as possible while the work takes place?
Minister.
What we'd say to the Right Honourable Gentleman is that this Government is determined to put passengers at the very heart of our railway, and so every effort, I'm sure, will be undertaken to make sure that that is indeed the case. So I'm pleased that this project can proceed and works will commence, as I said, in 2025, as well as delivering a modern, welcoming experience for customers. Will set a new standard for future buildings, being the first of the new and innovative Network Rail hub stations. I'm looking forward and looking for colleagues at Greater Anglia to progress this important project at pace to ensure the permanent structure is put in place to serve those customers and constituents who use this station. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.